The concept for Maniac Mansion was conceived back in 1985 by Lucasfilm Games employees at the time, Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick, who had both been hired the previous year to work as a programmer and artist respectively on the 1984 title Chronic Rift. The two bonded over their similar tastes in humor and love of horror and B-movies and decided to create a game out of the humorous cliches associated with those genres. The pair eventually settled on the concept of a group of teenagers entering a spooky mansion to rescue a girl from a mad scientist being mind-controlled by an evil meteor. They used the stable house at Skywalker Ranch, where Lucasfilm Games was based at the time, as a model for the mansion itself, with many of the rooms in the game being exact reproductions of those from the house, including the library with spiral staircase, and the media room with a grand piano and big screen TV, which in 1985 was probably just 27 inches, let's be honest. Many of the characters were even taken out of real life, as most of them were inspired by family members or friends, like Wendy being based on fellow Lucasfilm employee named Wendy, and Winnick's girlfriend at the time, Ray, providing the inspiration for Razor. I'm wondering how she feels about hamsters and microwaves, by the way. Dave was based on Gilbert himself, presumably in the wake of having his own girlfriend kidnapped by a mad scientist. Other characters like Bernard were simply based on stereotypes, and the characters of the Edison family themselves were shaped from characters from EC Comics, a publisher specializing in horror and science fiction. And yes, the man-eating plant was taken straight out of Little Shop of Horrors. While it seems obvious now, the concept of an adventure game as the genre wasn't chosen until Gilbert went home for the holidays and saw his cousin playing Sierra's 1984 revolutionary graphic adventure game, King's Quest: Quest for the Crown. Maniac Mansion was Lucasfilm Games' first self-published title, and upon release for the Commodore 64 and Apple II in 1987, the game was a big success both commercially and critically, with critics praising the game's storytelling, visuals, and non-linear gameplay. It was so successful, it received a number of ports in the following years to MS-DOS, Amiga, Atari ST, the Famicom, and NES, the latter of which I'll talk about later. So you covered some of this in the opening, Professor, but while some of the adjustments in porting Maniac Mansion to the NES were more practical in nature, like adding music or making sure the various screens would display properly on the NES, most of the changes related to Nintendo's censorship policies of the late 80s and early 90s. So, sexually suggestive or explicit content was not permitted in NES games, meaning a Playmate-like calendar and poster were removed from the gym, along with a nude statue in the hall and the words "For a Good Time, Edna 344" on the bathroom wall. In the same vein, they removed Edna's sexually suggestive dialogue of "How silly of me, I should have tied you to my bed" in the original version, in which he'd take the male characters down to the dungeon. Nintendo also had a policy prohibiting depictions of excessive or gratuitous violence, which meant that, among a handful of other changes, one of the video game cabinets in the game room's name was changed from Kill Thrill to Tuna Diver. Allegedly, they initially changed it to Muff Diver before realizing that probably wasn't going to fly either, hence finally landing on Tuna before finally submitting the game. Now, despite all the changes made in the name of Nintendo's violence policy, it's kind of amazing that the ability to microwave and explode a hamster was kept in. I have to imagine that Nintendo's censors understandably didn't try this themselves, and thus it slipped through the cracks. After the initial batch of 250,000 cartridges shipped, Nintendo purportedly did catch wind of this ability and subsequently forced publisher Jalico to remove it from future shipments of the game. Okay, so basically the Nintendo Entertainment System was limited to the ability to play 5 channels of audio played in mono for both the music and sound effects. Each of these channels had a specific type of tone which they could play, and each tone generally had a specific purpose in the context of a theme. 2 of these generate square waves, which are typically used to carry the main melodies which we think of. The 3rd channel produces triangle waves, which are commonly playing the lower notes of a theme, as the bass or occasionally the drums. A 4th channel creates a kind of white noise, which can be chopped and pitched up or down to create a percussive effect for most themes. So in other words, very lo-fi drums and beats. And the final channel can play low-quality digital samples. So anytime you hear a specific sound effect, like a very crude attempt at speech, that's what you're hearing. To further create a sense of dynamics, all of these channels can be set to 16 different volume levels. As I mentioned earlier, the NES version was the first instance of this game to feature a soundtrack. While you could argue that omitting music adds to the creepy vibe of the atmosphere of the original releases of Maniac Mansion on computer systems of the day, which creators Gilbert and Winnick were going for, NES games almost always feature accompanying music for most parts of their games. As such, publisher for the NES console port of Maniac Mansion, Jalico, commissioned Real-Time Associates, who brought in George the Fat Man Sanger and his band, along with David Hayes, to create the soundtrack. Each track was meant to reflect the personality and style of each character, including Jeff's surf theme, Sid and Razor's punk themes, and Bernard's stereotypically geeky theme. Another fun fact, Dave's theme was a pastiche of Thin Lizzy's The Boys Are Back in Town. Real-Time Associates founder and president David Warhol then translated their recordings into chiptunes. And you can find some of Sanger's original recordings online if you're interested. I didn't get a chance to talk about this in our initial class on this game, but one of the odder facts about what's already an odd game in Maniac Mansion is the fact that it was spun into a television show which involved George Lucas. Lucasfilm animators of the time, Cliff Ruby and Alana Lasser, pitched the idea of spinning the LucasArts game of Maniac Mansion into a television show to George Lucas. Lucas saw the potential and reached out to Toronto-based Atlantis Films to produce it. Atlantis then in turn reached out to Second City television writer and performer and Canadian Eugene Levy, later known for his roles in Schitt's Creek, the American Pie series, and much more, to oversee the development on the series. While the idea initially pitched to Lucas was more of a sci-fi comedy in the vein of The Munsters or The Addams Family, Levy enlisted his Second City peers to help him overhaul the concept into more of a lighthearted and family-friendly series with surreal and oftentimes meta leanings, which ultimately had little to do with the plot of the game. While Dave and his friends are absent, the show is still focused on the Edisons, but besides Fred, the father of the family, played by Joe Flaherty, best known for his roles in Freaks and Geeks and the infamous Heckler and Happy Gilmore, none of the other characters retain their names from the game. While a meteor did power parts of his basement lab, Fred wasn't evil or mind-controlled in the show, instead being portrayed as an eccentric inventor and scientist concerned as much with his role as a husband and father as he was with his experiments. The sweet and quirky comedy was generally well received and reviewed at the time and ran for 3 seasons and 66 episodes total before it was canceled in 1993. Adventure games of the 80s often relied on command lines, inputting text commands to interact with and play the game. Just like the Professor, Maniac Mansion's creator Ron Gilbert wasn't a fan of this style of gameplay, so instead he created a unique game engine titled the Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion, or SCUMM for short, an engine which would be refined and reused time and time again to build subsequent Lucasfilm games, later renamed LucasArts, titles on, including Zack McCracken, Full Throttle, and titles in the Monkey Island and Indiana Jones series. LucasArts finally abandoned the SCUMM engine in 1998 when they switched to the Grim E engine, named after the game they created using it, their critically acclaimed 1998 adventure title Grim Fandango. The SCUMM engine still lives on via the open-source SCUMM VM software, which is a set of game engine recreations, or in other words, a handy program for getting classic games to run on modern-day systems so that they're not lost to time.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and comment on this video, and click subscribe if you haven't already, as this seriously helps me to keep making great content for you. And check the description of this video to see what song is playing right now.